biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. The evidence for rapid climate change is compelling. Rising sea levels, warming oceans, melting glaciers. The aim is to keep the Earth's temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius. Amid a sense of divided consciousness, countries negotiate to find ways to combat climate change. Will it work? Watch it all in Special Report. Global temperatures have risen and fallen over the Earth's history for natural reasons, but never before have they peaked the levels seen today. The global average temperature is about 15 degrees Celsius, something that is not witnessed within the past 1,000 years. What's unique about the warming we are experiencing now is that it can't be explained by just natural reasons, and that it's happening faster than ever before. The year 2016 has already seen scorching heat around the world, with the average global temperature peaking at 1.38 degrees Celsius above levels experienced in the 19th century. The rise in temperature is closely linked to extreme events around the globe, from warming oceans and melting glaciers to reducing snow cover, acid rain, floods, droughts, tsunamis, and cyclones. Human activity plays a central role in the climate story. The fossil fuels we burn to power our homes, businesses, cars release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. More greenhouse gases in the atmosphere means a more intense greenhouse effect, causing the Earth to keep getting warmer. Studies suggest that there's more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now than there's been in the past 150,000 years.
In terms of carbon dioxide, it used to be 270 parts per million at the time of pre-industrial level. And today we are in June 10th, the latest figure is that we have really breached 409.
Some of the major greenhouse gas emitters globally are China, the United States, the European Union, India and Russia, a mix of countries representing the developed and the developing world. For a long time, this divide kept the nations away from finding constructive solutions to the common problem of climate change.
The difference between developed and developing countries remains till date one of the biggest political issues in the climate conversation. You will have countries saying that there are many developing countries who have a per capita GDP that's way higher than many developed countries. And they're not referring to India and China then, they're talking about countries like Singapore or South Korea.
Scientists knew it for over 100 years that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and that global warming might occur. But it was only in the early 1970s that the issue of climate change for the first time figured in a declaration at the United Nations Scientific Conference held in Stockholm, Sweden.
It was not a very heavily attended meeting, but it was attended by Prime Minister of Stockholm, the Indian Prime Minister. That's the first time you have a real conversation around this subject. You then have the Brundtland Commission and then you have 1992 in Rio.
The Stockholm Declaration warned governments to be mindful of activities that could lead to climate change and evaluate the likelihood and magnitude of climatic effects.
Around mid-1980s, the European Union took up climate in a very big way and focused on energy. It was around that time that the United States, being the largest user of energy, with a lifestyle where per capita emissions are twice those of Europe, 10 times those of India today, was opposed to this and framed the issue in terms of carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is not the cause of the problem, it is a symptom. The cause of the problem is the use of energy, the way we are growing.
The opinion was backed by scientific community. Over the next 15 years, the concern for the atmosphere and global climate slowly gained international attention and action. 1988 was the year when the father of climate change awareness, scientist James Hansen, and his team at NASA for the first time said in public that climate change was actually happening.
The greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a forum for the examination of greenhouse warming and global climate change, was established the same year. The issue of global warming and the depletion of the ozone layer were becoming increasingly prominent in the international public debate and political agenda. The 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro saw the clear divide between the have and have-nots, that is, the tussle between the industrialized and the still developing nations.
I am the one that is burdened with finding the balance between sound environmental practice on the one hand and jobs for American families on the other.
The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change came into being with the aim to stabilize atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases at a level that would prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. Nations realized that negotiations based on key ideas of adaptation, mitigation, financing and technology transfer were necessary.
Negotiating history of the climate treaty has been a periodic concessions to the United States, in a sense, to keep them inside as the ones who are really responsible for the problem and the richest economy.
The 1999 Kyoto Protocol gave a new direction to the climate discourse. The agreement required the industrialized nations to make substantial cuts in their greenhouse gas emissions. The United States never ratified the Kyoto Protocol, which was one big reason it didn't work.
Kyoto happened in a world where the difference between developed and developing countries was very stark. By 2000, you already see China, which is coming into its own economically, and India, which seems to be, on its way to come on its own, and therefore, there was a sense in the United States among its legislators that you could not have the US to be part of an agreement where the other big emitters were not included.
The Copenhagen Summit of 2009 was witness to a lot of chaos. The fissures between the rich and the poor, have and the have-nots, the developed and the developing nations were becoming clearer.
Either you join us or you get out of our way, but that's what you do, and that's exactly what happened. What happened in Bali, therefore, you created two tracks. One was the Kyoto Protocol, and the other, which came to be known by shorthand as the Bali track, got the US into the fold. The understanding was that in 2 years' time, that is at Copenhagen, the two tracks would merge and you would have a new climate agreement. And we all know what happened in Copenhagen. There was no new climate agreement.
Most governments agreed at the Copenhagen climate negotiations in 2009 that the world should act to prevent global warming going more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. They concluded that anything higher would be dangerous for many parts of the world.
Welcome to this press conference to present.
In 2013, the IPCC for the first time set a cap on the amount of carbon emissions we can allow into the atmosphere before calling a complete and permanent halt if the countries were serious about keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius.
If we really want to bring about a limitation of temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, there is then the need for an unprecedented level of international cooperation.
The IPCC tied the 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit threshold to the amount of fossil fuels that we can burn, and that came to 1 trillion tons of carbon. For the first time, the assessment of a carbon budget became central to the issue of climate change.
Simply looking at a temperature limit is not enough. The real issue is how do we grow within ecological limits.
The IPCC made its contribution by underlining the importance of containing the temperature at 2 degrees. But was the world ready to take immediate steps?
Around 2000, the international situation changed because China started pushing infrastructure in a very big way. Emissions from China crossed those in the United States. China's economy overtook that of the United States. And the United States, in a sense, rightly started saying, if you look at historical emissions, you also need to look at future emissions.
The 2015 COP21 meet in Paris hinted at a new style of international cooperation, one that enabled more than 195 nations to formally adopt an agreement that was likely to have a real impact on carbon emissions. It was a moment of hope, as every effort before the Paris meet had largely failed to bring countries on a common ground.
They balanced historical emissions with future emissions, and that was the essential background for the Paris Agreement, which has the same underlying principle that countries, developing countries, will go on unrestricted growth, but will need to shape that trajectory of growth, and at some point of time they must peak. But that peaking date has to be decided by the countries themselves.
Nations submitted their voluntary commitments to save the planet. India committed to reduce greenhouse gas intensity of its emissions by 33 to 35% by 2030, below 2005 levels. China pledged to cut emission intensity by 60 to 65%. The United States announced to reduce it by 26 to 28% by 2025. And the European Union pledged at least 40% domestic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels by 2030.
Paris becomes important because in what had almost been given up as, people didn't have a hope. You had an agreement that wasn't perfect, that could have been way more ambitious, but it created the starting point for the world to act together to address what is truly a global challenge, and it is a pressing problem for humanity.
The eventful year of 2016 left a deep impact on the global political dynamics.
That the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Britain moved out of the European Union, and a new leadership had taken over the United States of America. New decisions were on the anvil, and then came the major blow.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, thank you, but begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction.
The announcement by the US President Donald Trump was enough to shook the world that appeared to be united on the issue of combating climate change in Paris 2 years ago. But nations stood undeterred.
यह केवल पर्यावरण सुरक्षा का मामला नहीं है, लेकिन हम सबकी मदर अर्थ को बचाने की एक साझी जिम्मेवारी है, हमारा कर्तव्य है।
हमने यह हस्ताक्षर केवल अपनी कमिटमेंट के कारण किए, इसलिए अमेरिका उसमें रहे या ना रहे, भारत उसमें बना रहेगा।
We cannot allow one nation to derail what 190 other nations are happy to do.
The UK's position on the Paris Agreement remains as it always has been. We believe this is an important international agreement on climate change.
The future is still bright for those who have the courage to confront hard truths and the confidence to stay the course. Canada will not back down from our commitment to fight climate change.
Does the US not being part of the Paris Agreement have an impact? Of course it does. The US is the most powerful country, it's the biggest economy. Whether we like it or not, you have to acknowledge that the United States under President Barack Obama played a very important role in ensuring the Paris Agreement became a reality. It's the kind of diplomatic effort he put in. That heft is missing.
It is not just President Trump, but a sizable section of the elected representatives of the United States and the population who are not supporting the Paris Agreement.
Taking advantage of the fact that much of the increase in the developing world's energy use comes from its population growth, the developed nations have often put the entire blame of global warming on the growing economies. But the harshly distinct energy consumption patterns of some nations present a different picture. For instance, electricity consumed at home by one American is equivalent to 34 times an average Indian home, or what is being consumed by 61 people in Nigeria, 10 times than in China, 5 times than in South Africa, and more than twice the rate in Germany. Vehicles per 1,000 people in US is equivalent to 43 times of that in India. Per capita emissions in the United States in 2015 were close to 17 tons, which is way higher than India's 1.9 tons. 86% of Americans commute by cars compared to 10 to 15% in India. The United States has the world's second largest coal-based power plant capacity after China. 80% of all its energy needs are met by coal, natural gas and oil. In fact, per capita coal consumption in the US is 5 times more than India's. Though the economies of India and China have also been fueled primarily by coal in the last many decades, China burns more of the black stuff than any other country. China's installed power capacity is 5 times greater than India's, and the countries are racing to develop other types of energy resources. Currently, India has about 32 gigawatts of wind power and 12 gigawatts of solar power within a total generation mix of 320 gigawatts. Renewables, excluding large-scale hydropower, account for about 17% of its total power output. In comparison, China has 149 gigawatts of wind and 77 gigawatts of solar power, far ahead of its neighbor, although with less renewables as a proportion of installed capacity. While China got off to an early lead in renewables, India is looking to catch up over the next 10 years. India's draft National Electricity Policy affirms a strategy of rapid renewables expansion.
Now here India is again taking a lead, saying that by 2030, all the new cars that are going to be sold in India will be electric vehicles. We are looking at energy efficiency in a very big way to replace electric bulbs with LED bulbs.
India further plans to have 175 gigawatts of renewable capacity installed by 2022, meaning an additional 100 gigawatts of solar power and 60 gigawatts of wind power will be required in the next 5 years.
Think of the huge amount of energy requirement that we're talking about. Energy, not just electricity. On one hand, it is a country that's part of the G20. It's a country that's growing rapidly. At the same time, its developmental deficits are like that of, sub-Saharan Africa or worse. We straddle two worlds. This is a country that is best capable of giving voice to how to move forward, to make the fight against climate change one that is not seen as an economic drag, but as an opportunity to improve lives, to create livelihood. So I see for India an opportunity to emerge as leaders.
If we have a 2-degree window, then I think every occupant of this earth, irrespective of which country you are, you have the equal right to make use of this.
Climate change is already beginning to transform life on Earth. Without action, it only threatens to damage our world. The choices we make today will determine the climate of the future. The time to act is now.